Well, how much do you know about the relationship between Australia and India? We often talk about our relationship with the US. Of course, we do it here every week with David. We talk about our relationship with Indonesia, obviously with China. But what about India? Our new Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, tweeted this after meeting with India's PM Modi. Warmly welcomed, he said, by my meeting with Modi, the PM Modi. Australia-India ties have never been closer, he tweeted. Well, is that true? Do we really have close ties? Or is it just, what do they say, curry, cricket and the Commonwealth? Pawan Luthra is the CEO of the website Indian Link, and he's with us now. Pawan, thanks very much for talking to me.
Hi, Richard.
When Albo says of what you call Namo, Narendra Modi...
Narendra Modi, that's his full name, so that's been shortened to Namo.
Albo and Namo. When Albo says that he and Namo are closer than ever, is the relationship, is that true of the relationship?
It is. It's getting to be quite a lot closer than what it has been in the past. But in the past, there have been plenty of speed bumps in the way. There have been roadblocks, but recently there's been smooth driving. The connection between the people of the two countries is extremely strong, but often the government of both the countries have been at odds with each other. But over the last 8 to 10 years, that's improved substantially.
What's the low point?
Low point, I can identify two low points. One which worked very well, both of them worked very much against Australia. One was Paul Keating. When Paul Keating became the Prime Minister of Australia in the early 1990s, India was just opening up. India had some foreign exchange issues, and they opened up and liberalized the economy. And all the major Western countries, such as the US, the United Kingdom, began to view India, but Australia was nowhere to be seen. In fact, I spoke to Mr. Partha Saathi, who was an Indian High Commissioner and is one of India's leading diplomats, and he said that, and this is, I'll quote him exactly, Paul Keating, then the Prime Minister of Australia, was particularly symbolic of this policy of pretending India did not exist. And this is using these words.
Why was that? Because, Keating was into foreign trade and into foreign investment and all that generally. In fact, he was quite enthusiastic, for instance, about ties with Malaysia, as I remember it.
Exactly. But for some reason, what Mr. Partha Saathi had said was, I think it was a personal arrogance of Paul Keating, which was really responsible for the relationship between India and Australia. So for some reason, at the time when the rest of the world was beating their path to India's doors to start doing business with India, to start capturing the 800 million odd people in India at that time in various economic options, Australia was missing in action and was nowhere to be seen. So Richard, I used to ask my friends, I'd just come to Australia, and I used to hear this talk about closer relationship with India, with Asia. And when I asked my friends that where did they think India was in very vague geography, they said maybe the Middle East.
There was that nuclear test, though, wasn't there? That was a big freeze from Australia's point of view.
It was. That was in 1998. India joined the nuclear club. Australia went ballistic. Australia was very forceful in its approach, and while both Prime Minister John Howard and the then Foreign Minister Alexander Downer condemned this nuclear testing, the Shadow Foreign Minister Laurie Breton went as far to call the tests an act of nuclear bastardry. Mm-hmm. So the words which were used were an act of nuclear bastardry. And again, when I was again talking to, he was then the High Commissioner to Canberra, Mr. Partha Saathi, he explained that how can a country that looks to the US for its security undermine an initiative to take our security in our own hands. So India was very perturbed by the strong reaction, and he went as far as to say to Minister Downer that I told him that we will not deal with Australia. Australia did not count. We will deal and sort out matters with the US. And I thought that Australia was punching above its weight, weight at that point of time. And Richard, over a number of years, most countries improved their relationships with India, but India put Australia in the cold freeze just because of the way the India's nuclear testing was handled and commented on by the Australian politicians. So,
okay, if Keating and Brereton, both on that on the Labor side of politics, if they were partly responsible for the freeze, who was responsible for the unfreeze?
Well, after we had this situation, we had John Howard and Tim Fisher try to make overtures to India, but then there was a change in government, and when Kevin Rudd came in, again, there was another stumble because he refused to sell uranium to India. In fact, he also withdrew Australia from the naval exercises with Japan, Indonesia, and India without any consultation. But then it was left to Julia Gillard to fix the uranium problem when she convinced the Labour caucus to sell uranium to India in spite of India not having signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And she was the one who brought the relationship back on an even keel. And then, as you're aware, Richard, we had the revolving door of prime ministerships in Canberra, and nothing got off the ground till we had Prime Minister Tony Abbott come into power, and he reached out to India, and both Prime Minister Abbott and Prime Minister Modi kind of connected very well. Both of them were with a very strong religious bent in mind. Both of them came from very humble beginnings, and the leaders of these two countries have connected, and since then things have been pretty good sailing.
Okay, so destroyed by Keating, saved by Gillard, continued by Abbott. I guess the problem now, though, is there is a real difference of opinion, isn't there? There are lots of things that we share, of course, but there's a real difference of opinion over Russia, isn't there?
There is, and India has been pretty strong in coming forward in its support for Russia. Again, there's been a lot of pressure on India from the US and other countries to change its stance with Russia. India is still trading with Russia. It's still buying its oil. It's still trading in Russian rubles. But then so is China. So the whole idea is that they're going to be strange bedfellows in the current geopolitical situation of the world, that you're my friend, but your enemy may not be my enemy.
Yeah. Now, this, of course, is because of India's, worries about China, and in fact, there's been actual conflict not that long ago between troops from India and China on that border. So it's all understandable. But in terms of the horrors of Ukraine, is there internal opposition in India? Are people saying, "Look, we've got to stop endorsing this just terrible regime"?
I think while there is a quite murmur in certain society classes in India about doing business with Russia, but the majority are more concerned about cheap oil and cheap gas, which keeps them fueled up and keeps the economy going. So, no, there hasn't been a big protest from people on the streets condemning the Indian government. In fact, there's a quiet understanding that it's an economic reality.
And does, I'm going to call Narendra Modi Namo from now on, because I think it's so perfect the way you've cast it in your piece. Well, that's right. But Albo should get used to Namo. He's going to be in power for a long time. Is that still the case? Is he still enormously popular?
Yes, Prime Minister Modi is extremely popular. Elections in India happen every 5 years. He came into power in 2014, was swept back again in 2019. The next elections are in 2024. In India, there is not any good opposition to the government, so the thinking is that they're going to be in for a reasonably long time till an effective opposition gets its acts together. But no, Namo is going to be in power for a very, very long time.
And what's, with Albanese saying we're closer than ever, what are your hopes? If everything goes as well as it possibly can, given the things we share and some things that we don't share, what do you see for the relationship? I noticed, I think it was even today, there was talk of more Indian students coming. Obviously, there's a great desire to export more between both countries. What's your most hopeful thing about the relationship between the two countries?
Look, as an Indian Australian, I would like the relationship to be as close as possible. Economically, India is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. The new Indian consumer is young, aspirational, with lots of money. very well connected on the website, so very informed about what's happening around the world. Australia needs a new partner. Recently, there's been a trade deal signed between Australia and India, which will allow tariffs to be eliminated on more than 85% of Australian goods sold to India and 96% of Indian goods. The ambition is to increase bilateral trade from current 24.9 billion. So currently the bilateral trade between India and Australia is 24.9 billion to 100 billion, Richard, 100 billion by 2030. India's got the consumer market. Australia can supply a lot of things, including educational facilities, tourism, travel, and so on. If we can work together, it's a fantastic amalgamation of the aspirations of the Indian Australians.
Do you like our wine? Or do they like the Indians in India like us?
I'm sure you do. Wine. In fact, tariffs on wine has reduced from 150% to 100% and subsequently to 50% over 10 years. So the price of Australian wines would go down in India. So now when I go back to India, I can get a Brown Brothers red for about 80 Australian dollars. Wow. I hope to get it for the same price as in Australia of about $15.
Yeah, that's right. It's still very expensive, isn't it? And when all that trade liberalisation happens, what's the best, for a normal consumer, what's the best thing we'll be able to buy from India at a reasonable price?
I think at the moment there's lots of gems and jewelry and other things, but pharmaceuticals. India is big pharma country, and if they can start exporting pharmaceutical goods to Australia, a lot of medicines which we need for our aged care for people around here will be far more economical. At the moment, Indian pharma countries get the permission from the FDA in the US to sell their pharmaceuticals in the US, but then they have to go through the whole process again through a similar organization in Australia, which just makes things a bit longer to get through and more expensive. If there can be an international acceptance of the authorization which the Indian pharma has, I think that will benefit a lot of Australian consumers to have cheaper medications, which I think is fairly important.
Well, I looked at on the box of my blood pressure tablets only yesterday, and they're made in India. So there you go.
It's starting, Richard.
I'm on the good stuff. Hey, very nice piece, a very interesting piece about the relationship and how it's changed over time. Thank you so much for talking to me.
Thanks, Richard.
Pawan Luthra is the CEO of Indian Link Media Group. You can read his piece on his website about how this relationship has changed.